Finance. I'm Duncan Sandlin. I hope everybody's having a great week. Lacey's out this week, so it's just me, but we got a fun show. We got a bunch of stuff for you. We're going to talk a little bit about the debt today, but we're also going to cover RFK Jr. And basically how his campaign is pretty much over. Biden staying in the race despite calls for him to leave after his awful debate performance. Some of Trump's problems with CEOs that we didn't cover before, but Trump also having some mental cognitive problems. I mean, they're both old. We'll get into some of that. More Epstein files were released recently this week, linking Donald Trump more to Jeffrey Epstein. It also, Prince Andrew, which we all kind of knew about, and definitely Bill Clinton too. So we'll cover that a little bit, and then I want to cover Project 2025 since that's starting to come out into the spotlight of what that is and just how horrific that whole plan is. And we'll have some fun clips on top of that. And last but not least, it looks like AOC is pushed to impeach Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. So we'll see how that's going to go. But I wanted to start with a quick little finance thing to dive right in. And it's just talking a little bit about the debt. And so I wanted to go to this bit here from Yahoo Finance, where this came up, because this is going to come up in the election, and it's also really important for you to know about just for your personal finance stuff. But here are these guys, and they are talking about the debt, so we're going to skip over to them real quick.
Let's have a $35 trillion question on their hands. Who is going to pay for our nation's ballooning national debt? Joining us now is Yahoo Finance's Rick Newman. Rick, I always assumed it was me, frankly, and my kid, but who else?
Well, it is going to be you and your kid and me and all of us, really. Neither of the candidates this year, Joe Biden, if he remains a candidate on the Democratic side, and Donald Trump on the Republican side, is really leveling with voters about this. No politician really does. And the reason is pretty obvious. There's nothing for anybody to like in how we solve the problem, and there's a lot for everybody to hate. Now, there's a new analysis out by a budget expert at the Manhattan Institute named Bruce Riedel. He does some good work on this issue. And he has come up with a way to address the problem of the national debt. And that doesn't mean paying the whole thing down. That's kind of impossible. But it means just stabilizing the debt at about 100% of GDP, which is around where it is now. In other words, preventing it from growing much more in the future. And here's some of the ways he says things we're going to have to do in order to do that. There are going to have to be benefit cuts in Social Security and Medicare for wealthier participants in those programs. He would make no changes for people who are in the 40%, the lowest 40%.
Okay, so I want to start with this. So I love how they do this. Social Security, Medicare are expensive parts of the government, but they're funded primarily by us paying taxes and money coming in. So right now, the issue with all that is if we're talking about putting that money in, that's not really money that's contributing to the debt or the deficit that much, other than what the government owes us back. So I'm not quite sure why that fixes anything. On top of the fact that I would start with the basic argument with is, okay, is the debt high? Sure, but we haven't seen a situation where because the debt's high, it's actually been catastrophic, or it's racked up inflation or caused some sort of negative inflation or something. In fact, we've seen Japan go through this before, and other countries where they've been able to float their debt for a very long time, provided the government keeps floating the money. It's kind of like Monopoly. The bank can never go bankrupt. Otherwise, the game's over, right? It's kind of the same thing here. The U.S. government can never go broke. Otherwise, the whole world economy is screwed. So I don't know that that's a huge issue. Now, do I agree that we probably shouldn't keep running it up and playing that game? Yeah, sure. But to a degree, capping it at 100% of GDP, that's fine, whatever. But this idea that we have to make cuts is kind of odd. And I want to go back to this because in the article, it's a little different. So this guy's trying to summarize the article. Here's the article, Rick Newman. The America's most unaddressed gigantic problem is the $35 trillion national debt. It's rapidly growing to unsustainable levels, and Americans are eventually going to face some unhappy choices. Well, it is still growing, but the deficit's actually come down under Biden quite a bit. And it did under Obama. It ballooned under Trump and under Bush Jr. I mean, it balloons heavily under, just in the last 40 years, Republican presidencies tend to rack up the debt, as where Democratic presidencies try to reduce the deficit. In fact, Clinton left with a surplus where the government was making more money than it was spending. So neither of the year's presidential candidates, incumbent Democratic Joe Biden or Republican challenger Donald Trump, is leveling with voters about the sacrifices that loom. Okay, so Biden's solution, and Biden actually has come up with something here. Biden wants to raise taxes on businesses and the wealthy without touching benefits in the budget, busting retiree programs. See, he's got a bias already, budget busting. Yeah. Social Security and Medicare. Trump pretends that some new tariffs on imports and more supply-side tax cuts will magically solve the problem. That won't. That'll exacerbate it. So he goes on, virtually no politician tells the truth about how to fix the debt because the real answer is that there's something for everybody to hate. Tax hikes, spending cuts, the benefits reductions are all inevitable. I don't know about that, though, because you see, once again, it comes back to Social Security has a trust fund in it right now. The trust fund is going to go bare in whatever it is, 10 years. At that point, it doesn't mean that we don't get Social Security, because like right now, people collecting Social Security, the bulk of what they're collecting is not money that they put in that was saved. It's money you and I are paying right now into the system. So even with the trust fund gone, they'll still be getting around 70% of what they'd be getting now. The way to increase that so they still get the maximum is you lift the caps on the taxes. Because right now, if you make over a certain amount of money, you don't have to pay tax, Social Security tax, on the amount above what that is, whatever that number is. Right now is 100 and something for a single person. So wealthy people are not paying in the fair percentage of what they're doing. I mean, that's just how it is. They're just not paying as much. Now, if you lifted that cap and let them pay it, that would go into it. He does cover that here, but that would cover Social Security. You wouldn't need to cut it. Right? So it's just an odd thing. Because I don't see where that's, because it's not attached to the budget. Social Security is separate from the U.S. budget. A lot of what goes into Social Security is money that the government owes Social Security that's borrowed from Social Security. That's a lot of what that is. And that's our money that they owe us back. So I'm against cutting that in any way, shape, or form. Medicare, too. Okay, so he comes up with solutions in a new analysis from the Manhattan Institute. Ryan Rydell outlines a range of actions Congress can stabilize the federal borrowing and forestall the debt crisis that would cause soaring interest rates, one or inflation, or both. Once again, we don't know that that's true. And, proponents of modern monetary theory don't believe that that's necessarily true. It doesn't really matter in that scenario how big the debt gets as long as we can continue to make the payments, the interest payments on the debt. If we can continue to do that, we can float debt forever. What you don't want to do is put too much money into the system, because then you'd have runaway inflation. So there is such thing as too much debt because we'd be putting too much money into the system as the federal government, and that would cause you'd have too much cash and not enough stuff to buy, which would jack up prices and screw everything up. So you want to keep that balance in there, but it really doesn't seem to matter all that much how much we're running up the debt, as long as we can pay it every month or every year, whatever it is. So not really. I mean, it's kind of an odd thing that they'd be bringing this up, especially on CNBC or Finance. Sorry, this is because corporations do this all the time. Like recently, I was looking at Coca-Cola, and they run at they have like 28 billion something in debt on their books, and they don't make 28 billion a year in bottom line, but they can afford to pay the interest. It's not a big deal, and they've got plenty of cash on hand, so it's not an issue. The government always has plenty of cash on hand. So I don't know what that argument is, but apparently they seem to think that. I just don't understand why. So the United States doesn't need to pay off its entire national debt. Well, of course not. That would be crazy. It just needs to peg it around 100% of GDP and keep it there. I'm not sure how he comes to this conclusion. He might be using Rogoff and Reinhardt or something like that, which has already been discredited, because that was their assumption too. And it found out that whole study was bogus. And the actions Rydell outlines are not draconian ones that will be necessary if Washington dawdles as usual and waits to the last moment to address the problem. There are a few truths of debt math. One is that taxes on the wealthy are going to have to go higher. See, that's just a fact. And that's going to have to happen anyway, just for if we want to get into better income inequality, wealth inequality, more distribution. That means more people spending, because the middle class and the lower middle class will have more money. and they tend to spend most of their money. Why? Because they don't have that much. So if they had more, they'd spend more, which means more commerce, more taxes. It would all be good for the goose, good for the gander. So yeah, taxes have just got to go up on the rich, period. Otherwise, it's, right now, I mean, if it were a Little League game, they'd have called it, because the rich are so disgustingly rich compared to the rest of us. But that's why they're going to have to tax them, because that's where the money is, of course. They have all the money. The share of national wealth controlled by the top 1% of earners has risen from 14% in 1990 to 16.8% at the beginning of 2024. Yeah, if you take the top 10% of everybody, they own more than half of the country. So yeah, this is a little bit of a fixed number. It's not exactly. I mean, if you talk about total wealth and assets and real estate and everything else, they're talking about a national wealth. Well, the share for the bottom 50% has dropped by a bit. No, it's dropped by a lot. Higher taxes on the wealthiest Americans would restore some balance lost during the 30 years. Yeah, no kidding. So another inevitability is that better off seniors are going to have to pay a little bit more and take a little bit less because they get a disproportionate share of federal benefits. That's actually true. So right now, and I think he gets into this, I'll get into it in a second. So many Medicare and Social Security recipients mistakenly believe they bank contributions they're fully entitled to once they retire, but that's not how these two programs work. Instead, both programs are broadly funded by current workers paying, which is like why I said, if we cut this, how does that help the debt? Because it's funded by us paying it in right now. Paying enrollees according to benefit schedules that, in some cases, were established long ago when life expectancy was lower and retirement very different. Right, we need to fix it. But that's kind of the issue there. If we can fix those kind of problems, we can start getting somewhere. But the point I wanted to get at before is seniors having it a little bit better off. So right now, seniors who are retired that are collecting Social Security, they're getting more back than they put in on average. So they put in X amount of money, they're getting more than what they would have put into it. The Generation X is going to get right about what they put into it back for the most part, maybe a little less. And then from the millennials on down to the younger generations, we're probably not going to get, if nothing changes, we're maybe going to get 50, 60 cents on the dollar of what we put in. So there does need to be a reform on that. And the best way to do it is to just lift the cap and up the taxes on the rich. But that's essentially what it gets down to. If you raise taxes on the rich, at least Biden's looking at half of this, you could say we need to do some spending cuts. I don't know how necessary it is, and I think it would actually be more of a detriment because you'd have more poverty. You'd have less people spending money, so you'd have less tax coming in to actually deal with the problem. We've seen this happen in Europe with austerity. This part of the big reason, the big rejection in the UK recently of leadership was, because they'd gone through all this austerity stuff and then Brexit, and now it sucks. Their economies did not recover as well as ours, and ours recovered well by the government spending us out of the problem. It's kind of the old argument in business too, where you have a company and it's like, oh, okay, we're looking at a hostile takeover. Okay, so we need to, slash the red ink, cut spending as much as possible, build up enough cash reserves so we can buy back enough of our stock and drive up the price to make it too hard to buy us out. Well, the problem is by cutting all that, you're going to fire a bunch of people, you're going to have lawsuits, you're going to be paying unemployment, and it's going to scare investors, and they're going to bail out, and your stock's going to go down, and then you're in deep shit. As opposed to, why don't we try to expand our way out of the problem? Why don't we try to grow? Let's build a new factory, do something, get other investors interested to drive up our stock price so it's too expensive to buy us out because we're growing too quickly. That's kind of the argument here. He's saying slash the red ink. I'm sitting there going, well, and he's saying grow too, but I'm saying forget slashing the red ink. We need to find a way to fund these programs and grow them out. And that's the smartest way, I think, to get out of this problem. But that's just my take on it. I'd love to hear your take if you disagree or agree or whatnot. But that's sort of how I spin it. But I wanted to just jump into that, just to flavor on it for you, just to get a sense of what's going on financially in the world and how the debt really kind of affects all of us going forward. I'm not particularly concerned with it, but I think if we raise taxes, we could certainly get a better handle on it and get it to a more palatable place. Not that I think it matters all that much. But moving on to the news here. So, kind of wanted to cover RFK one last time. I didn't get a clip of this. I should have. I didn't think about it. But he recently, there was something about him allegedly eating a dog. I don't know if it happened or not. And then he had to go on TV and say, "Oh, I wouldn't eat a dog. I wouldn't eat a person." And I'm like, "Yeah, things are not going well in your campaign if you have to tell us you wouldn't eat a person." I mean, that should have been a given. But after that, and he had brain worms, and the reason his voice is kind of messed up is because he's had brain damage, and he's a weird, wacky conspiracy nut. Nonetheless, his whole presidential campaign is just dead in the water. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to be president. He's not even going to be close. So I just wanted to cover this quick article here. So here's the Daily Beast. They just covered this. Did RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign just flame out? Well, it had. It's already been flamed out. So he failed to qualify for the presidential debate. He's totally bleeding cash. He's got no money left. He's only on 9 state ballots out of 50 states. So he's still not on the ballots for 41 states, and he's not going to be able to get on most of them. He'll be lucky if he gets on 13 or 14 states. So even then, even if he wins all those, hypothetically, he still doesn't have enough electoral votes to become president. So there's no possible way he can become president at this point. So I'll just read this for you. So in the run-up for the season's first presidential debate, set for July 27th, long-shot third-party candidate RFK Jr. managed to satisfy 2 of the prerequisites to run for the Oval Office, being born in the United States, yeah, good for him, and filing an official statement of candidacy with the Federal Election Commission. Okay. However, the longtime anti-vaxxer and brainworm survivor failed to clear the bar on 2 other requirements, namely reaching a threshold of at least 15% in 4 major national polls, which he's not even close, of registered likely voters, and getting himself on the ballot in enough states to have a shot at clinching the necessary 270 electoral college votes needed to win the election in November. So he can't even if he wins everything, he's not going to be on it. So, like, for example, I live in Oregon. He's not on the ballot here, and he's not going to get on the ballot here. It's pretty much too late. So even if, let's say, everybody who votes in Oregon voted for RFK Jr., he's not eligible on our ballot, so our electoral college would either have to turn in a no vote or they'd have to pick somebody on their own. Right, so there's just no way he can win. It's just physically impossible at this point. So, I don't know, for all you RFK supporters out there, I mean, sorry, it's done. He's not going anywhere, he's not winning. That's the end of the road for him. So, just, take heart. Sorry about that, guys, but he's done. You can stick a fork in him. It's over. But, yeah, just couldn't even make it to the debate. Kind of sad. Probably a good thing for him that he didn't, though. 'Cause, you get the one guy with brain worms. You got Biden and Trump were both dirt old. And both of them have a lot of problems. And I don't know, it's kind of a drag that our presidential candidates are so old. I mean, both of these guys are nearing, average, life expectancy. I'd be shocked if both of them live out the next 5 years. But Biden got in there, and Biden kind of tanked it at the debate. He looked old. I guess he claimed he was sick. I don't know. I don't really care. But there's been a lot of pressure for him to step down from the candidacy and let somebody take over. There's some negatives to that. The thing I'd be most scared of is he steps down and the Democrats get into a big argument over the next 4 months up until the election about who's going to be the candidate. When the only person right now who's set up to continue running, who has the funding, is Kamala, because she'd have all of Biden's funding in his ground game. So the vice president could run. But if they start squabbling over somebody else, then, I mean, it's just going to create confusion and create a lot of problems. So it would have to be Kamala that would have to step in. Does Kamala have a good chance of winning? I don't know. I from the polls, it looks like she's doing pretty well. In a hypothetical, but it's hard to know. She's certainly younger. I mean, it's unfortunate that's the bar. But nonetheless, Biden says he's staying in. So unless something dramatic happens, he's probably going to stick stick this out through the election, and here's him talking about it.
The president is doubling down, issuing a letter to his fellow Democrats saying he is firmly committed to staying in the race and wouldn't be in it if he didn't think he could win it. Stephen Fabian reports.
President Biden is standing his ground today.
I am not going anywhere. I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024.
His defiance coming as pressure mounts on him to bow out.
Several senior House Democrats say it is time for the president to step aside.
He's not winning this race. It's more likely that he'll lose by a landslide.
Biden doesn't care.
I don't care what those big names think. If any of these guys don't think I should run against me, go ahead, announce for president. Challenge me at the convention.
He told congressional Democrats today in a 2-page letter, I have heard the concerns. I am not blind to them. It's time for it to end.
The White House continues to argue that this was one bad night, and they're trying to put the president now in more unscripted situations to prove that he is able to keep going.
The First Lady was also defiant at a rally in North Carolina today.
Joe has made it clear that he's all in. I am all in too.
But
Let's
the
go to
First Lady is facing increasing criticism for not encouraging her husband to call it quit.
Yeah, well, it is what it is. He's going to stay in. Nobody's going to stop him at this point. Right or wrong, we can argue back and forth. My thing is, as long as he wins, I don't really care. As long as it's a Democrat, I really don't care. I'll take a wet mop if they run against Trump right now. It's a drag. This is what it came down to. I kind of wish Biden would have kept his promise in 2016 when he said he was only going to be a one-term president. I think he was going to step down because of his age, but here we are. So we got to live with it. It is interesting though that, I'm still going to vote for him. I'm still going to support him. But the thing about it is it's just interesting to me. It's like the guy has one bad debate performance and everybody's saying he should step down. But the Republican candidate gets convicted of 34 felonies and is found to be liable for rape. And the Republicans all line up and support him. And it gives you a big sense of the difference between these two parties and how they function. But speaking of that, Trump is having his own problems, lots of his own problems, as usual. I want to start with this. So, he's been courting business. Now, Trump's whole thing is he's going to be the good president for the economy and business. And he's got all these weird ideas, but he goes out and he tries to court the CEOs from Fortune 500 companies, and it does not go well. It goes really bad and backfires. And this is a Squawk Box. I forget this guy's name, Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. But yeah, let's just jump into this.
This was written by somebody we know very well. And joining us right now to discuss CEO sentiment on the 2024 election is Jeffrey Sonnenfeld. He's Yale School of Management Senior Associate Dean for Leadership Studies, also a CNBC contributor. His op-ed, which was trending yesterday in the New York Times on Sunday, he says that former President Donald Trump, quote, continues to suffer from the lowest level of corporate support in the history of the Republican Party, and effectively makes the case that CEOs are not for Trump. And so, Jeffrey, we want to talk about this because, I think we hear certain things anecdotally. You say you hear things anecdotally, and I think we're all trying to make some sense of where things really are. So what do you say?
Well, thanks, Andrew, and thank you for kind of blazing the trail in getting the record straight last weekend, coming off of the Business Roundtable meetings where some press wrongly reported it as if the CEOs had gathered there coming to see him. It was the quarterly meeting of the BRT, and President Biden had also been invited but was at the G7 meetings in Italy, but his chief of staff went. And they found it confusing and were certainly no rounds of applause. And your reporting is corroborated from what we've picked up. Myself talking with three specific CEOs who were there. Two of them are rather hostile to Biden. One of them was uncommitted. And they walked away pretty confused about President Trump. We look back into the data, and we're looking at this now for the last 4 months. We've been pointing out that there are no Fortune 500 CEOs who are supporting former President Trump. And that is a historic break going back to William Howard Taft and through Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan and the Bushes and everything.
Yeah, so it's amazing. The Republicans used to be the party of big business, right? The lower regulations, lower corporate taxes, all that stuff. Now they cannot get behind Trump. 7 years ago when he ran, or was it 7.5 years ago when he ran, they were like, yeah, we're semi-optimistic, but they didn't really know what he was going to do. Now they know he's going to go back into a big tariff war with China, which caused inflation to rise, which slowed business. He's talking about funding the U.S. government now with tariffs and getting rid of income tax, which is psychotic, because tariffs would have to be like 85% on the price of goods, which means the price of goods would go up by dramatic. I mean, inflation would be catastrophic. We also know he's probably not going to fund Ukraine in their war with Russia. Ukraine is also one of, if not the biggest producers in the world of wheat, which brings down, costs of not just bread, but anything that's involved with wheat or wheat products. They're a big bread basket in Europe. It'll drive up prices there, and they already has from the war. But if Russia takes over, it'll be even worse, and they will if we don't support them. The problems in the Middle East with Israel right now, they're bad, but yeah, I mean, Biden hasn't done enough. Don't get me wrong, but Trump is going to let them run ramshot and just commit genocide, in which case you potentially could have Egypt or Iran or Syria jumping in to try and support the Palestinians, so you could have war in the Middle East, and things could be really bad. Plus, a lot of the businesses are aware that regulation on climate change has actually been a good thing, because right now climate change is expensive for businesses, extremely expensive. It costs billions of dollars a year for businesses when you have adverse weather patterns that are destroying infrastructure, they're destroying crops, they're making it difficult to ship goods. It causes a huge problem. So they're on board with, we got to do something for climate change, and we prefer the government pay for it than we do. Because right now they're the ones having to float some of the bill for a lot of this. And so if you deregulate it, then you have a bigger issue, right? It's what we call moral hazard, right? If me and my competitors, if it's cheaper for us to pollute, well, even if I really don't want to, I kind of have to in order to be competitive with my competitor. But if you make it illegal for both of us to pollute, well then, hey, I'm not going to pollute, because if he pollutes, then they could face getting lawsuits or fines or whatever, or getting shut down. So it's important to have these things. So Trump is really scaring the CEOs. On top of the fact, not just his wonky ideas that don't really make any sense, but also this. And they were talking, this is furthermore about this same meeting that they talked about later on.
Will say I was surprised. I spoke to a number of CEOs who I would say walked into the meeting being Trump supporter-ish, or thinking that they might be leaning that direction, who said that he was remarkably meandering, could not keep a straight thought, was all over the map, and that they, which may be not surprising, but was interesting to me, because these were people who I think might have been actually predisposed to him and actually walked out of the room less predisposed to him, actually predisposed to thinking this is not necessarily, as one person said, this may not be any different or better than a Biden thought if you're thinking that way.
So we've got two guys that are old. One, Trump is a little mentally off. He always has been. But now it's starting to seem like he really can't even keep a straight thought. Biden, on the other hand, is just old and slow. The difference is the Republicans are going to stay in lockstep behind Trump. It's just going to be, most of them are, not all of them, but you start to see some breaking up, but most of them are. But it's gotten to the point where it's just incoherent with some of this stuff. And here's one clip. I mean, there's so many we could go over, but here's one recently from a couple weeks ago, just to give you an idea of how crazy this is gotten with Trump.
What would happen if the boat sank from its weight, and you're in the boat, and you have this tremendously powerful battery, and the battery's now underwater, and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there, By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? A lot of shark. So there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat, 10 yards. Or here. Do I get electrocuted if the boat is sinking, water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking? Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted?
Okay, so the people in the background are just, what the fuck? So apparently I think he's trying to talk about electric vehicles, and he's trying to tell a story and saying, okay, there was this guy in South Carolina who said that they want to require electric batteries in all the boats, which isn't true. There's none of that's going on. Furthermore, you think a billionaire would know this? Most yachts have gigantic batteries that run all the electricity of the yacht. So this is not like it's a new thing. Yacht batteries are expensive and huge. I've seen them before. People use them to like people who build like bombshell bunkers. They'll use them to as electricity to run the bunker because a yacht battery is perfect for that. So I don't know what the hell he's talking about. So he's talking about batteries, and then all of a sudden there's sharks, and then the boats can't float because of the battery, because I don't know, displacement doesn't apply anymore. I mean, we have to go back to third grade fucking science. I mean, it's just insane. But this is what he's been talking about. He's been talking about conversations or weird conversations he thinks he might have had or should have had with Hannibal Lecter, who's a fictional character and a serial killer. He's talking about, well, you know, how great his body is. If he took his shirt off, you'd see how great his body was, but he has lots of scars and wounds. And I'm like, oh, yeah, you're a fucking billionaire. You've never worked a day in your life. You don't have scars and wounds. It just reminds me of somebody with Parkinson's, like when my grandfather had Parkinson's. And he'd tell you these stories, and they didn't make a lot of sense, and you didn't know where he was going, and then you realize, oh, he just watched a movie. He's like half remembering the movie he just saw. So it just seems like that with Trump. Like, yeah, clearly he was watching Shark Week, and that's what he came up with. Right? You'll see a lot of scars on my body. Okay, he just watched Rambo. Hannibal Lecter, he just watched Silence of the Lambs. So it's just when he's gone. So you got two old guys fighting it out for president. What's more important is who are they bringing with them, and kind of who they are as people. But I want to get to this, and I always get tired of talking about Trump, but we got to cover all this shit. So anyway, Jeffrey Epstein, very famous pedophile, probably the most famous pedophile in the world. Recently, I mean, he's been dead for a while, but recently documents have come out from his previous court filings. They were released by a judge, that were released early, and they have more connections between him and Trump. Now, nothing in there was accusatory towards Trump, but Trump was listed in there, Bill Clinton was listed in there, Prince Andrew was listed in there. But Trump was a lot closer to Jeffrey Epstein. They were closer friends than Trump admitted, or would previously believed. And this hasn't been getting a lot of press lately. It's more still about Biden and the debate thing from a couple of weeks ago. But I think it should be in the press, and so does Ted Lieu. And here's Ted Lieu to try and illustrate that point for us.
So like Chairman Aguilar said, we hear a lot from our constituents on different issues. But something I've heard that doesn't seem to be being covered are the Epstein files. These files were released, and like Donald Trump's sort of all over this, right? There are pictures of him with Jeffrey Epstein. He's taken multiple plane flights with Epstein with young girls on board. He is on call logs with Epstein. One of the highest trending hashtags on Twitter right now is about Trump and Epstein. I'm not going to repeat the hashtag because we're in a dignified setting. But yeah, y'all might want to look at that because that's highly disturbing. And again, it shows that Donald Trump is unfit for office. And by the way, he was convicted in a civilian court for sexual assault, convicted in a separate court of 34 felonies. Donald Trump should drop out of the race.
And he's absolutely right. But the Republicans don't have the dignity or the moral values to do it. They're not going to ask him to drop out. But it brings it back to this, and this is why I think this is important, because we've covered this, because the sexual assault shit bugs me. That let a guy run for office with this kind of stuff. He should be in prison. Because he's had a lot of sexual... We went through some of them. There are like 28 real credible ones. He settled a bunch out of court by paying women off. But there was one that was really kind of disturbing that led to some of their accusations that this was a long-term trend. So him and Epstein had a falling out sometime after he married Melania in like 2005. But we knew he was friends with Epstein back in the early 90s. So he was friends with Epstein for over a decade. Now, was it just sort of I knew the guy, casual guy, he was a golf buddy kind of thing, but I don't really know much about him other than that. Well, could have been. That's sort of how Trump played it off. But it turns out, like Ted Lieu said, no, Trump's calling Epstein a lot, especially in the early 2000s. They're hanging out a lot. They're hanging out, going to parties a lot. He's on Epstein's plane. Epstein's going to his casino back in the 90s and taking underage girls with him. And in 1994, there was a huge accusation that, it came out later, but in 94, that Trump raped a girl that was 13. It was actually 3 girls. But one girl came forward and then later dropped it because she was scared, which is understandable. You're going after a very wealthy, powerful guy like that. And then she brought it up again later on and then started getting death threats, and her attorney's computer got hacked. And so she was afraid she'd get doxxed and she'd get murdered, or her family would get murdered, so she dropped that case too. So it was really just an accusation. And there was some question about, well, how valid is the accusation? How good or not is it, or whatnot? Well, now we know there's a lot of backing to that, because he was pretty close to Jeffrey Epstein. So I want to go into this case real quick, because we've covered it. So this was from Vox. This is from a while ago. This is back from 2016. Okay? So the lawsuit accusing Trump of raping a 13-year-old girl explained, okay, the anonymous plaintiff dropped her lawsuit against Trump, the circumstances which have been bizarre, okay? So, let's see if you guys can see this well enough. I'll zoom in a little bit. So 15 women have now gone on record, it's now 28, to say that Donald Trump sexually assaulted them. Out of all of their stories, one is the most explosive and bizarre woman who says Trump violently raped her at an orgy when she was just 13 years old, but the horrific details of her accusation have gotten the least attention. It seemed that was all going to change Wednesday when the woman, who has gone by the pseudonym Katie Johnson or Jane Doe, was set to appear at a press conference at the law offices of Lisa Bloom, her attorney, a high-profile civil rights attorney and TV commentator. But the woman didn't come to the press conference. Bloom told a room full of waiting reporters that Johnson was afraid to show her face after receiving multiple death threats and that they would have to reschedule. Then on Friday, Bloom announced that Johnson had dropped her lawsuit. So this is Lisa Bloom's tweet. Jane Doe instructed us to dismiss her lawsuit against Trump and Epstein today. Tough week for her. We wish her well. Followed up with, everyone makes her own choice about what is best for her life. Life's a journey. Most of us get stronger as we get older. I respect women. I mean, I get it. She's scared. It's not uncommon for victims. This is just me reading. It's not uncommon for victims of sexual assault to want to preserve their anonymity. And dropping a lawsuit doesn't mean admitting the case had no merit. Jill Harth, who sued Trump for sexual assault in 1997, still stands by her claims, even though she dropped the lawsuit. And it would indeed have been an intense couple of days for Johnson. Bloom said that her firm's website was hacked that Anonymous, right, the whatever internet guy, had claimed responsibility, and that death threats and bomb threats came afterwards. So that was dropped. And she basically claimed that they were in an orgy thing, Trump raped her, then Jeffrey Epstein got angry at her because he wanted to take her virginity kind of thing. There were some charges about Trump getting upset or maybe even physically violent with her because she didn't know how to give oral sex. This is not uncommon kind of stuff, and it is sort of par for the course, because if you read his first wife's book, Ivana, she describes a pretty violent rape when he raped her. Of course, she didn't press charges. She kind of tried to walk it back some, but she describes it in pretty good detail. When you hear Stormy Daniels' description of what happened, when you hear Trump talking about grabbing by the pussy, and then you see Trump at all these, he's got the Miss America and Miss Teen, or Miss Teen USA and Miss USA, and he's talking about to Howard Stern about how, yeah, all these girls that are 16, 17, and I'm going backstage while they're naked so I can check them out. He's partying on boats with all these young women. All of his wives have been really young. He's always talked about how he only dates young women. He talked about Epstein. He knew Epstein pretty well and said, oh yeah, Epstein likes younger women. Just to remind you, here's that old video of Trump partying with Epstein back in, this is 92. all right? So we know they were friends up until probably about 2005-ish, so over a decade. I mean, the young girls there. I mean, so just wanted to remind you of that. I also want to remind you that back in '94, when this alleged rape happened with the young woman, just to remind you, Trump has a daughter, and in 1994, Ivanka would have just been turning 13, and just to give you a reminder, here's his daughter, Ivanka, with his first wife in 1994. So he's raping women that are the same age, or girls, sorry, that are the same age, allegedly, as his daughter. Just want to give you that picture. So when you tell your friends, right, they vote for Trump, this is who you're voting for. So I just wanted to hit that. I think that's important to bring that up. That, you know, the guy he is a rapist. He was found to be a rapist by a jury. He's settled out of court many, many times for sexual assault. You know, that's just who he is. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about going forward was, this kind of came up this week with in the news, was Project 2025. And what happened was, the BET Awards, the Black Entertainment Channel, they had their big awards, and one of the actresses got up there. I forget her name. She's a great actress, though. But she got up and she said something about this at the BET Awards, and it was kind of amazing that she did this, and I think it was great. But here's Chris Hayes on MSNBC, and I just want to show you this clip real quick, and then we'll jump back in.
Project and its proposals, thanks to warnings like this one from host Taraji B. Henson at this week's BET Awards.
Pay attention. It's not a secret. Look it up. They are attacking our most vulnerable citizens. The Project 2025 plan is not a game. Look it up.
According to some reports, the project actually began trending.
So yeah, so she did a great job by illustrating that, and it started trending because of that, and it's good, because a lot of people should be looking it up. It is pretty dangerous and pretty scary what it is. So we're going to look a little bit about this and what they're talking about doing with this project, and I'm going to let Chris Hayes take it a little bit from there, just to kind of give you a sense of what the Republicans, the Trump people are trying to do if he wins. This is what they want to do with the government.
There is this nakedly authoritarian plotting, like the plan to weaponize the Department of Justice as a tool directly under the control of Donald Trump. Quoting from the document itself, the DOJ falls under the direct supervision and control of the President of the United States as a component of the executive branch. Litigation decisions must be made consistent with the President's agenda.
Okay, so that means the President gets to decide who gets investigated and who gets charged. And it has to be with his agenda, not based on justice or by dispassionate third parties. So it's basically weaponizing the police, the Department of Justice.
By the way, Justice John Roberts just endorsed that in the 6-3 immunity decision, so they've got carte blanche on that. What it means is that Donald Trump directs the Department of Justice. There is no independence. There's no firewall. He tells them what to do, who to prosecute, who to defend, and the like. And I think this portion of Project 2025, the authoritarian plots to purge the civil service, replace it all with MAGA loyalists, like deep down into the government, is getting most of the attention, and for good reason. But there's so much more to Project 2025, including, again, a whole bunch of fringe, hard-right culture war stuff. So, for instance, unsurprisingly, the document calls for a full-out, whole-of-government approach to the assault on reproductive rights on women. for conservatives to gratefully celebrate the greatest pro-family win in a generation, overturning Roe v. Wade. It includes an effective abortion ban by calling for the FDA, right? They're going to appoint people to the FDA who suddenly announce, oh, you can't have a medication abortion. Reverse.
So part of what he was talking about before, and I want to get into this. So what they're saying is right now there are two kinds of employees in the government. There are, especially in the executive branch, there are people that are appointed by the president. They're political appointments. Those people tend to go with the outgoing administration, and the new people coming up with the incoming. They're all hired. That's, a few thousand people, 4, 5, 10,000, whatever it is. The vast majority of employees in the executive branch are non-political employees that are appointed there, that are specialists or experts, or they've just worked in the field forever. And those people cannot typically be just fired. Now, what they're saying is we're going to take a lot of those people out and replace them with people that are only loyal to the president. So then they'll get to make decisions. So, for example, and he gives a great example there. For example, the Food and Drug Administration, right? Right now, you can get abortion pills for, the mail-in stuff. The Supreme Court allowed it and whatnot, so it's legal. It's part of your rights. Now they can just have the FDA loyalists, for whatever reason, just make something up and go, well, we deem that they're too dangerous, so we're just going to make them illegal, carte blanche. Then the FDA will just restrict them. And then you can't get abortion pills. They're going to do the same thing with public education. It's kind of like they tried to do before with Betsy DeVos. They're going to put somebody in there. They sit there and go, well, look, we don't like public schools. We're going to take all the funding for public schools, and we're going to give out vouchers for private schools. So only, upper middle class kids can go to school. And all the poor kids are screwed. I mean, that's the kind of stuff they're talking about doing here.
Its approval of chemical abortion drugs like mifepristone, which is used in the majority of all abortions in this country. And again, in red and blue states where abortion is legal or not. And to be clear, there's no absolutely justification for this, right? Mifepristone has been used safely for decades. This is not a scientific determination. They're going to put some apparatchik into charge of FDA to do this. Project 2025 wants to take it away, citing in part the hundreds of thousands to millions of babies whose lives have been unjustly taken through chemical abortion. The document goes further than FDA approval, calls on the Department of Justice to criminalize sending the pill through the mail under the Comstock Act, an archaic anti-obscenity law from the 19th century, which has been rendered largely unenforceable in subsequent decades. In addition to the abortion pill, Project 2025 also wants to strip the mandate for free emergency contraception from Obamacare. And look, Republicans are not going to stop until they have all but eliminated access to reproductive health care in this country, full stop. They're also, not surprisingly, committed to stopping the enormous seismic green energy transition to doom us to the most catastrophic consequences of climate change. The document refers to attempts.
So, before we get into climate change real quick, I want to go back to reproduction, because the FDA could then say, well, look, we think condoms are unsafe. We think the pill is unsafe. And they really want to do this. Because once you have toadies, little yes men in place like that, in those positions that aren't, people that are permanent there, that are non-political, or supposed to be non-political, then you can just, whatever I say goes. It's like being a king. Whatever I decree is law. So I can just tell that guy, hey, just say this. So it's a fake democracy. It's a faux democracy. It's kind of like Russia or Turkmenistan, which is real. It's a real country. That's really what it's like there. But yeah, they can do shit like that now. They're going to reverse the climate change stuff, which we kind of sort of talked about before. Businesses are not super thrilled about, because it's right now costing them billions a year, because climate change is dramatically hurting their ability to do commerce and business. So,
to mitigate climate change, to mitigate it as a radical climate policy. It calls for an end to the unprovoked war on fossil fuels, for the government to oppose eyesore windmills built at taxpayer expense. The document also calls for all federal laws, grants, regulations, and contracts to delete every instance of the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, and reproductive rights. saying they're used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights. Reproductive health. It demands the Department of
I love that too. You can't say these words because they deny Americans of our First Amendment right, which is freedom of speech. But now we're going to take away words that you're not allowed to say anymore to protect your freedom of speech. Okay, yeah, done. Whatever. It's all backwards. They're just making shit up.
Health and Human Services immediately put an end to the department's foray into woke transgender activism. And get this, I don't think people know this, but people should. Pornography should be outlawed, and the people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned.
And I'm going to end on that one, because that just shows you just how right-wing Christian nationalist crazy this shit is. They really want to make sex unsafe. They want to make women's health care impossible to get. They want to get rid of porn. Pretty soon it's going to be illegal to have casual sex at all. Premarital sex in any shape or form. I mean, they're still going to do it. They're still going to get abortions. Rich people are. They can afford it. But for the rest of us, I mean, it's like they're going to criminalize this. It's going to make it criminal just to be a person. I mean, the Supreme Court just said it was okay to criminalize people for being homeless. And that's here in Oregon, in Grants Pass. And we were kind of shocked. Because how can you criminalize somebody for being homeless? You know? I mean, we're not that far back from, let's go back to like, well, I mean, Trump's talking about putting migrants in camps. Immigrants in camps. I'm sure it's not going to be the white immigrants. But that's what we're talking about. Really talking about total right-wing fascist, draconian authoritarian shit. That's what Trump's wanting to plan to do. Now, he's basically walked this back because he knows how horrible and unpopular this is. So he's basically said, oh, I don't have anything to do with this. I don't know anything about it. Blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of what he's been trying to do now. I don't know anything about this. I'm not a part of it. And it is a 900-page document. I don't think he read it. But to say he doesn't have anything to do with it is bullshit, and here's why. So here's an article from just popular information. What Trump doesn't want you to know about Project 2025. So Project 2025 is a radical blueprint for a potential second Trump administration, spearheaded by the right-wing Heritage Foundation. The plan calls for withdrawing approval for the abortion pill, banning pornography, slashing corporate taxes, abolishing the Department of Education, replacing thousands of experienced federal workers with political appointees, imposing a biblically based definition of marriage and families, see, I told you Christian nationalism, and placing the Justice Department and other independent agencies under the direct control of the president. These and other provisions of Project 2025 are quite unpopular, as Project 2025 has gained notoriety thanks to actor Taraji P. Henson, who she's great. If you guys have ever seen her, she's fantastic. I liked her in Person of Interest. She was really good in that. And others, Trump has sought to distance himself from the effort. On July 5th, Trump posted on Truth Social that he knows nothing about Project 2025 and has no idea who is behind it and has nothing to do with them. Here it is, the quote. I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them. First off, whenever Trump denies something that hard, you know he's full of shit. Every time. Oh, I don't really know Michael Cohen. Oh, no, I don't know Stormy Daniels. I never met her. Oh, I don't really know Jeffrey Epstein. I didn't know Ghislaine Maxwell very well, but I wish her well. He always does that same shit. It's hilarious. So, yeah. Basically, here it is. That is false. This is false. The co-editors of Project 2025, Paul Dans and Stephen Groves, both held high-ranking positions in the Trump administration, and they will again. Under Trump, Dans served as chief of staff at the Office of Personal Management, the agency responsible for staffing the federal government, and was a senior advisor at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Groves served Trump in the White House as deputy press secretary and assistant special counsel. Project 2025's two associate directors, Spencer Chrétien and Troop Hemingway, are also tightly connected with Trump. Chrétien was special assistant to President Donald Trump. the Associate Director of Presidential Personnel, helping to identify, recruit, and place hundreds of political appointees at all levels of government. Previously, Trump appointed Creddy into a position at HUD. Hemingway also served as Associate Director of Presidential Personnel. Project 2025's 922-page policy agenda has 30 chapters and 34 authors. 25 of Project 2025's authors served as members of the Trump administration. Another Project 2025 author, Stephen Moore, was nominated by Trump to the Federal Reserve, but forced to withdraw over his past inflammatory writings about women. There's a shocker. Further, William Walton, a co-author of the chapter on Department of Treasury, was a key member of Trump's transition team. So all these people, all told, of the 38 people responsible for writing and editing Project 2025, 31 38 were appointed or nominated to positions in the Trump administration and transition. In other words, while Trump claims he has nothing to do with the people who created Project 2025, over 81% had formal roles in his first administration. And most of them were people he wants to bring back for his second administration. So yeah, it's got his fingerprints all over it. They basically want to make him a dictator. This goes back to what I was saying before. Trump's not really the threat. Trump's an idiot. He's the guy who's a useful idiot. It's those guys that are the threat. Those guys are the ones that we need to be scared of. That's why I don't give a shit if it's Trump or Biden as a person. I want it to be Biden because the people I know Biden's going to put into place aren't going to be just fucking yes men. They're going to be people that actually believe in government, believe in democracy. Trump wants to put in a bunch of guys who just want to put in yes men and do this Christian, white nationalist, fascist shit. That's what they want to do. So when you're voting for president, I mean, not to be mean, if Biden dies in the second term, be terrible, sure. But fine, Kamala will be there, it'll be fine. And the people they have in staff and ready to go will be fine for the government. They won't be my first choice pick, they won't be my first draft pick, but the bottom line is they'll be okay. Right? Trump gets elected, Trump could live or die too. Doesn't matter. You know, if he dies, bummer, whatever, but those people will be in power. And while they're in power, Trump doesn't care about policy. He doesn't care about any of this shit. Trump will sign whatever they put in front of him, as long as they keep him in power. And that's what's going to happen. That's why Trump's trying to walk back, because he knows that that's what's going to happen. They know that's what's going to happen. But you can't tell that to the public because they don't like it. That's why you should be out there, and if you have the chance, tell your friends. Project 2025, it's serious. If you like being able to watch porn and have casual sex and date who you want, then you really, really should be on top of this. So that's what's going on with that. Moving on, some I don't know if it's good news or interesting news. So the Supreme Court's had a lot of problems. Nobody trusts them. They've been making shit up. I mean, they've been breaking precedent. Recently with the Trump versus the United States, they ruled in Trump's favor, basically giving him immunity as president on a number of fields. But it's interesting because in the Constitution, it specifically states the president a former president can be indicted and tried for criminal acts. And they're basically throwing that out, and they've basically thrown out that part of the Constitution by rendering the Constitution unconstitutional in that decision. So it's weird, and it breaks all the previous precedent on this issue of presidential powers, because had that ruling been in place when Nixon was president, Nixon wouldn't have stepped down, and he wouldn't have had to have been pardoned by his successor. So, I mean, we've changed things quite a bit here, so it's basically given the president carte blanche. On top of that fact, they've reversed Roe v. Wade when it wasn't even discussed in the Dodd decision. They just tacked it on for no reason. So it's become pretty bad. On top of the fact, we know that Roberts, for one, and Clarence Thomas and Alito, especially Terrence Thomas and Alito, have all taken bribes. They all have ties to these right-wing groups like the Heritage Foundation, which is funding Project 2025, which is the thought process there, and quite a bit of money, especially Clarence Thomas. But Clarence Thomas's wife is literally a lobbyist for these right-wing Christian nationalist groups. And Alito's wife, we know, is a right-wing nationalist. So kind of interesting stuff. What's going to happen with the Supreme Court? They have a lot of power. They've been really screwing with the government. They've changed centuries of precedent just in the last few years. And it's been pretty devastating. But some action's being taken. Ocasio-Cortez and a bunch of other progressives have decided to go ahead and try to impeach him. And we're going to talk about that real quick.
Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has filed articles of impeachment against Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. It follows two Democratic senators asking the Justice Department to investigate Thomas. They want a special counsel to look into whether Thomas violated federal ethics and tax laws. The senators say that he didn't disclose more than $267,000 of a loan allegedly forgiven in 2008 as income. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island and Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon say there's evidence that Thomas willfully broke laws. The complaint also mentions free travel and gifts, largely unreported on Thomas's financial disclosure forms. Those were first reported by Scripps News partner ProPublica.
So, two things happened here. One, AOC filed articles of impeachment on Thomas and Alito for taking some of these bribes and other stuff. We'll get into that in a second. The other was Ron Wyden and I think it was Whitehouse, where senators actually pressured the DOJ and they moved forward to the DOJ to investigate Thomas. I don't know about Alito, but Thomas for sure on criminal activity, because if Thomas is taking this money and not claiming it, Thomas is committing tax evasion. So it's tax fraud. I mean, if you sit there going, well, yeah, but he's taking bribes, and isn't that an ethics violation, all that? Actually, it isn't. There is no ethical rules on the Supreme Court, because they get to make their own rules, and there isn't any. And that's part of why this impeachment process is going through. So here's Axios with AOC, and we'll cover what her strategy is here, what the progressive strategy is here. So AOC unveils articles of impeachment against Justices Thomas and Alito. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a group of House progressive on Wednesday introduced articles of impeachment against conservative Supreme Court Justices Thomas and Alito, blah, blah, blah. Why it matters. It's a long-shot element of a broader legislative push by House Democrats to rein in the court after a spate of decisions in June that incensed liberals. So this is what that means. By impeaching them, right now, the Republicans control the House. There's no way they're going to get the votes to impeach. It's highly unlikely. But it does a couple things real quickly. By doing that, it means they can start investigating them, which puts pressure that if they find something more, something dirty, on top of that fact, the Senate's putting pressure on them, right, to investigate with the DOJ. If something comes up, it's going to look really bad. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on John Roberts to maybe start reining him in and putting down some ethical rulings. Because right now there is rules of ethics for federal judges. The Supreme Court just happens to be exempt, which is kind of bullshit. And Roberts has defended that they should be exempt. Well, they're trying to pressure him to do something. If he does or doesn't, we'll see. But it's something to try and put some pressure and leverage on them to do that. On the other side of the coin, it's also kind of a threat, because if the Democrats win in November and they take the House, or they could probably take the House, but they have to also keep the Senate, which is kind of up for grabs. And Biden's president. Well, in that case, Biden would be president. Now they have the votes to impeach and do a full investigation and a full hearing, which means they'll drag all the questionable Supreme Court justices through the mud on national television, just like they did Trump's impeachment. So Roberts has to start sweating a little bit about this, about what's he going to do. The other thing it does is by forcing the impeachment vote and getting in there, a lot of, like in New York especially, and some of the like California stuff, you get some of these sort of like swing districts which have Republican representatives, House representatives. Well, what happens is they're going to be forced to vote not to impeach after all this obvious bribery and Thomas taking all, just like blatantly what should be criminal shit, right? And bias and all that. And so they're going to start running ads against those people coming up into the election. Hey, Thomas did all this, he's taking all this money, blah, blah, blah. And this guy voted not to impeach him. So it puts pressure on Republicans who are running in more swing districts. So it gives them more leverage going into the election to try and knock some of those people out. So all in all, it's not a bad strategy. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's a great idea to move forward. I mean, what's the worst that could happen, right? So the resolutions. I just want to finish this up. Driving the news. The resolutions accuse Thomas and Alito of refusing to recuse from cases in which they had personal bias or prejudice concerning a party. That's a fact. As well as failure to disclose incomes, gifts, and other financial information, also factual. The articles targeting Thomas include a third charge, refusal to recuse from matters involving his spouse, because his wife was involved in January 6th. And he still ruled on the immunity case, which dealt with January 6th. The resolutions point to lavish gifts both justices received from benefactors reportedly involved in or connected to cases before the Supreme Court. They were directly involved with the cases and sponsored some of them. The measures also point to the involvement of Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, in efforts to overturn the 2020 election, and reports of Stop the Steal symbols at Alito's property to argue that the recusal from January 6 related cases was warranted as well. So this is not going to go anywhere, because even if they get it through the House and they get an impeachment, which they're not going to get, it's got to go to the Senate. You got to get a 2/3 vote from the Senate to impeach him, which isn't going to happen. So it seems like it's stupid, except for it puts a lot of pressure on John Roberts, and it puts a big spotlight on the Supreme Court, right? Because the Supreme Court's trying to legislate when the judicial branch, they're not supposed to be doing that. And so the legislature to attack them and put a check on them is a good thing. And to put pressure on them is a good thing. That's what they should be doing as the legislator. So, hats off to the progressives for actually doing their job here. So that'll put pressure on them. On top of that, it'll put pressure on their Republican opponents and delicate seats in the House that they desperately need. It'll put pressure on those guys because they can say, look, they're just as corrupt because they voted not to impeach these guys that are clearly taking bribes. So, all in all, it's a good strategy for the Democrats. They can only gain from this. They can't really lose. So, that was just kind of the news stuff for today. I just wanted to cover a lot of stuff. But I wanted to get into some clips that kind of get into the point of this, which is part of the problem, like I said before, is the Republican Party has gone to this point where it's very right-wing and it's very yes man, follow the king, step in a line. And so really the only qualification isn't, you don't have to be smart, you don't have to be capable, you don't have to know what you're doing, you just have to be a big enough suck-up to the king, in this case Trump, right, for them. So that's what happened, and now you've got all these morons that are kicking around in positions of power that don't even know what's going on. And to begin, I'm just going to give you kind of an example of who they are and why that is, but we're going to start with one of my favorites, who actually might win her election this year, which, it's good for us because, we love making fun of her. But Lauren Boebert, the Boeberduke, just recently, I don't know, it's endless with her. It's always stupid video after stupid video. I can't believe how dumb she is. But here is a video where she gets kind of fact-checked right to her face on the floor over something really, really stupid she should have known better.
Asking about the EPA, and I'm asking about your rogue bureaucrats that have enacted these unconstitutional regulations. Are you going to repeal them? Are you going to continue to implement them? Or are you going to stop altogether since it's been overturned?
Do you understand the ruling?
Do you understand the ruling of the...
Okay, so let's get into this real quick. So, she's talking to, I think, the director of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So, recently there was a ruling where the Supreme Court shot down what's called the Chevron Doctrine. Now, the Chevron Doctrine was a case against Chevron, basically said, look, because judges and legal experts were not scientists, were not experts on these things, we don't get to make decisions. We're going to defer to the experts to interpret ambiguous things in the law. For example, let's say I'm a company and I'm dumping a specific chemical into the water. Now, could be the chemical's harmless, could be it's not. Now, let's say it gets interpreted, EPA does some data, does some research, and they find out, look, there's a direct correlation and causation, potentially, between me dumping this chemical and cancer rates in the city where I live have gone up since I started dumping this chemical. So there's a direct correlation, there's potential causation, whatever. The EPA then has to make the decision, well, look, is this significant enough that we need to restrict me from being able to dump this chemical in the water? The EPA gets to make that decision. The experts get to decide. Supreme Court overruled that. Doesn't work that way anymore. Because that's what the Chevron doctrine said, is the EPA gets to make that decision. Is this a dangerous chemical? Congress just passes it, will you all stop dangerous chemicals? EPA has to decide what those are. Now the court's saying, no, the court gets to decide whether or not it's a dangerous chemical, even though none in the court is an expert in this matter. So what ends up happening is the EPA has to go, okay, well, we think it's a dangerous chemical, so let's take it to the court. Well, of course, my company's going to try and delay that trial and delay it, and it could take years before it finally gets in front of a court. They're going to make a ruling. I'm going to appeal it. If I lose, this is going to go to a higher court. And then if that loses, I'm going to appeal it again, try to get to the Supreme Court. In the meantime, years have passed where I'm still polluting the river. And there's a good chance the court's going to go, well, there's not enough direct link to say that it's not safe, so we're going to rule in my favor. That's what we're talking about. So that's what happened. That was the ruling. The ruling is now the courts get to decide these things. She's going back and saying, well, hey, EPA director, because the court ruled that, everything you've done is illegal, so you have to repeal all of your rulings before and all of the regulations and everything, and totally, that's not what the court ruled. The court ruled that in the future we get to decide. Not that anything the EPA did up to this point was wrong. That's where she's mistaken. That's why he's laughing about, do you understand the ruling? Because she's telling him, well, you need to repeal all the stuff that you've done. And all the environmental regulations and regulations on lead and gasoline and poison and stuff that goes into people's food and whatnot. Yeah. That's where this is so crazy.
Supreme Court?
I do. And so your question is ill-formed. No.
So which ones are you going to repeal?
The Supreme Court didn't tell us to repeal anything.
They have been deemed unconstitutional.
No.
Absolutely, they have. This was a huge victory.
But I would just like to clarify a few things for my colleague from Colorado. The Loper-Bright ruling said that the courts should not defer to agency rulemaking if a statute is ambiguous, and instead the courts get to determine whether or not what the statute means. Is that your understanding as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that would not require any regulations to be reversed or overturned, correct?
Correct.
Asking about...
I swear her staff hates her. That's got to be what it is. She's going to be, oh, I'm going to tell him he needs to repeal all this. Yeah, Lauren, you should do that. You should totally do that. You should tell them that the Supreme Court said it's unconstitutional. And they didn't. That's not what happened. I love it, though. It's just so stupid. But it gets to the bigger point, because she's not the only one. It's just all the way down the rabbit hole. I want to do another clip of another stupid person, just for fun, because I want to get into, hammer this point home. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene, just recently... another EPA commissioner, Michael Regan, talking to him, and she just, I don't know. I don't know where she's going with this. She's just crazy.
$34.8 trillion in debt. And one of the reasons is because of the reckless spending of the Biden administration, all due to climate cultist beliefs that they have got to regulate and spend hard-earned tax dollars in order to control the climate. The Biden administration's cumulative new regulatory costs imposed surpass all of his predecessors. According to analysis of the administration's own published cost estimates, as of May 17, 2024, the administration had already imposed $1.6 trillion in new regulatory costs. That $1.6 trillion is almost the entire budget for 1 year.
Okay, so Okay. Man-made climate change, that's got the scientific consensus. And when I say consensus, because I've had this discussion before, it's not a consensus of we called a bunch of scientists and asked them what they think. This is a consensus of the body of work done on this, the conclusions of the findings. Some of these scientists that have concluded, yeah, well, the evidence points that climate change is real, man-made climate change is real. Some of these scientists are like, nah, they don't necessarily personally believe it, but the evidence leads there. And as an academic and a scientist, you've got to go with what the evidence says. So the consensus of the evidence is, yes, it's real. In fact, there's a bigger consensus for climate change than there is for the theory of gravity. Just to give you a sense. So this is not something that's debated about, whether or not climate change is real. The other thing she's saying is, okay, 1.6 trillion, it's not true. So here's what it is. I've got it from the government themselves right here. All right, this was I'll scroll up and show you what it was. So this is just the progress report on the President Biden's climate finance pledge. So this is just sort of the running through it. You can read this whole thing if you want, but here's where it is highlighted here. So this is just 2022 from then. Total U.S. climate finance increased from $1.5 billion in fiscal year 2021 to $5.8 billion in fiscal year 2022. Of this, $2.3 billion was for adaptation, $2.8 billion was for clean energy, and $655 million was for sustainable landscapes. $2.6 billion was provided as grants, while the remainder was loans, loan guarantees, insurance products, and other financial instruments intended to leverage greater sums of private finance. This includes a $950 million concession loan to Clean Technology Fund. So she's off by a factor of like 1,000, like at least 500. So no, this is some 1.6 trillion. She might be doing that over like what the change is going to be over, like, I don't know, 50 years or whatever it's going to be. I don't know what it is. 10 years based on what it is. I think she's also including pushes for solar energy and pushes for electric batteries and things like that. Which part of it, that's a climate change thing. Part of that's just industrial adaptation. That's where the markets are eventually going to go. But what she's missing is the bigger point is, where's the demand for this? That the government pay for these things in climate change and regulation. Well, there's a lot of demand from business and from commerce around the world. And that was part of the thing we were talking about with Trump earlier. But here we're going to go back, and here is CNN Business. This is what the companies estimate. This is corporate estimates here. Climate change is costing the U.S. $150 billion a year, right? So here it is, New York CNN. Every 3 weeks, the United States experiences an extreme weather event that produces $1 billion worth in damages. This is just what we're paying for every year. All right? Every 3 weeks, $1 billion from extreme weather that never happened before, according to the latest U.S. National Climate Assessment Report released earlier this month. Compare that to 40 years ago, when extreme weather episodes that cost an inflation-adjusted $1 billion happened once every 4 months on average. So now it's happening way more frequently. As of November 8th, there have been 25 weather and climate disasters with losses exceeding $1 billion, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. That exceeds last year's count, even without data from the last 2 months of the year. In total, extreme weather events cost US $150 billion per year due to direct impacts such as infrastructure damage, worker injuries, and agricultural losses. The authors of the report estimate, and the cost of extreme weather events is expected to grow in the near term with a projected rise in sea levels and temperatures, the report states. Included in this year's tally are the devastating wildfires that took place in Hawaii over the summer, the damage from the wildfires, which took the lives of over 100 people and destroyed thousands of homes and businesses, cost $5.6 billion, according to an estimate from the National Centers for Environmental Information, the division of NOAA. There are also important economic implications. For instance, the authors of the report cited separate research published in April by MIT's Center for Real Estate, which found that property damage from hurricanes can result in higher mortgage delinquency rates as property owners become more financially stressed. The author also cited research that found flooding and rising sea levels lower home prices and property values as more people relocate to areas that are less prone to flooding. Hurricanes in the United States can also strain government budgets since they tend to lead to substantially higher social safety net disbursements, including unemployment insurance and public medical payments, according to research published in 2017. Do you think that if you're a business and you're shipping products and moving goods and you've got customers to service, that you're not incredibly concerned about this? If you're a business. How about if you're an individual and you're worried about your house? This is a major issue. So for her to sit there and go, oh, we're overspending on climate change, and then she cites a figure that's ridiculous, that makes no sense. Frankly, I don't think we're spending enough. But I think it's hilarious because that's how stupid these people are. You'd think somebody could at least tell them, this is not the fight you want to make. It doesn't make any sense. But it does for her, because that's how she's raising her money, through her constituents, most of whom are uneducated. Most of them don't know what's going on. And part of that reason is because they're in the bubble and they're listening to people like this, like Candace Owens. I'm going to go to this is John Iadarola with the damage report. But I want you to show this. This was a recent thing. Candace Owens, a right-wing newscaster, very popular, right? She's one of those in the big YouTube circle. I mean, my channel will never have as many views as her, but this is her talking to these people that are Marjorie Greene's supporters, which is why Marjorie Greene's pushing this shit.
My garbage person is chosen not just for who they are, but what they're against. Take a look.
Just imagine being married to me. I mean, my poor husband, he rolls over. He's like, what are you reading? And I feel like a regular wife says something, I don't know, maybe a love series, Nora Roberts, sweeping her away. Me, on the other hand, he rolled over, he asked me, and I said, oh, I'm reading a flat earth theory. And he was talking about the earth curvature and science. And I said to him, listen, I'm not a flat earther. I'm not a round earther. Actually, what I am is I am somebody who has left the cult of science. I have left the mega church of science, because what I have now realized is that science, what it is actually, if you think about it, is a pagan faith.
Okay, so she doesn't believe in science because it's pagan faith. Do we have multiple gods in science? I don't know who they are. But it's a pagan faith. Okay. But I want to announce that I'm against science, and that I'm against the cult of science, and I'm going to announce it to you on YouTube, via the internet, broadcast to you from a satellite through cable. Fuck science. I mean, we could go into just the science and the manufacturing process to make her clothes, to make the camera, to make the computers. How many thousands of people that employs? But she's against science. That's how stupid this is. But they're playing to that cult. That's what it is. We need to play to that, to the stupidity. And we want people to be stupid. We don't want them to be educated. We want to denigrate intellectuals. We want to put them down. We don't want to be like them. We don't like them. We want to attack them. Because if there are no facts, if there's no realities that we can accept, then anything I say can be true. Which is part of what, like, Newt Gingrich started doing this a long time ago. This is part of that whole cult with the anti-science stuff. You saw it a lot with Rush Limbaugh. And you see it still now with Turning Points and, what was it, the Daily Wire and all these other places. And it's gotten to this point where it's permeated into that sort of right-wing, far-right atmosphere. And that's part of what leads us to the Trump people and all that, where they, no matter what facts you tell them, they don't believe them. They only believe what they want to believe or what they're told from their little cults. Right? And just to wrap up my whole point on that, wrap up the show, here's somebody I don't like or agree with, but she's right about this, and she's right sometimes. But here's Liz Cheney, of all people, and she's going to tell you what the problem is with the Republican Party.
What we've done in our politics is create a situation where
we're electing idiots. And so I don't look at it through the lens of like, you know, is this what I should do or what I shouldn't do? I look at it through the lens of how do we elect serious people? And I think electing serious people can't be partisan.
We're back now.
So she's got a point there. And that's the point. And the problem is how can you elect serious people if you're cutting education and nobody knows what's serious and what isn't? How can you elect serious people, especially in the age of social media, when they're just seeing bullshit all the time? Like Candace Owens, like Marjorie Greene, like Lauren Boebert. So that's part of where the problem is. So when people ask me, okay, you know, how is it that people are voting for Trump? Because they believe that shit. Because that's what they hear. They're in that bubble. I've talked to them. We invite them on the show every week, and no one ever comes on. They always run away as soon as we start talking to them. But yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes. But that's how it goes with the world. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful and fun for all of you. I mean, I find it amusing. But I hope everybody has a great time this week. We'll catch up with you next week. Right now, if you have emails, you want to send clips to us or ideas, or if you want to come on the show and debate us, please email me below, gossipfinance80@outlook.com. It's in the link. Thank you, everybody, for joining me, and I will catch you next time.